Tony Curtis's dramatic life went much beyond his days as a Hollywood star. The actor formerly enthralled audiences with his charisma and breathtaking performances. His private life was often in the news, whether it was because of contentious movie sequences or his several high-profile marriages. Tony Curtis's daughter has now spoken up, confirming shocking details about her father's troubled past that have long been speculated about. Have any fresh mysteries been solved? We will discover. On June 3rd, 1925, in the Bronx, New York City, Tony Curtis's father, Bernard Schwartz, came into this world. Growing up, Tony had a difficult upbringing at the hands of his impoverished Hungarian Jewish immigrant parents. Poverty, familial strife, and an adverse environment shaped his character as he grew up in a working-class neighborhood. Tony and his brother were put in an orphanage on many occasions when their parents were unable to care for them due to financial difficulties caused by Curtis's father's job as a tailor. After enduring such a challenging childhood, Curtis resolved to leave his home and start again. When Curtis was a kid, he had to cope with the death of his younger brother Julius, who was killed in a car accident. This tragic event colored his view of the world and added to the emotional difficulties he had as a child. His attitude on life and will to accomplish were profoundly influenced by his early encounters with adversity, loss, and poverty. Even as a child, Tony Curtis had a profound affection for films and would often seek comfort in going to the theater to see them. His family's financial situation made his ambition of becoming an actor appear unattainable after Curtis served his country in the Navy during World War II. He came back home intent on making a name for himself. After deciding to make acting his career, he uprooted his life and headed to Hollywood to fulfill the childhood goal that had sustained him. Curtis became famous as soon as he arrived in Hollywood. He had an irresistible charisma that complemented his breathtaking good features. He was ideal for the kind of heartthrob parts that were popular in Hollywood back then because to his good looks, black hair, and gentle blue eyes. In 1948, Universal Pictures signed him because they thought he had talent. In an effort to gain greater popularity among American audiences, he was given the name Tony Curtis during that period. Curtis was eager to show the world what he could do, even if he started off in little parts that nobody really cared about. Despite the little screen time he had in his early flicks, his talent was undeniable. Curtis quickly gained prominence in larger films because to his magnetic presence and the awe-inspiring reactions of audiences, particularly ladies. With his breakthrough performance in 1951's The Prince Who Was a Thief, Tony Curtis started his meteoric climb to Hollywood stardom. Young ladies in particular fell head over heels for him due to his magnetic presence, endearing attitude, and inherent charisma. In contrast to the other enormous stars of the 1950s, Curtis was driven by a goal to become famous for his acting. The athleticism and penchant for action-packed parts that Curtis exhibited in films like Houdini, 1953, and Trapeze, 1956, helped propel him to stardom by the mid-1950s. His status as a prominent Hollywood star was solidified by these films, which helped establish him as a leading man. Still, he became a Hollywood legend because to his parts in Spartacus 1960 and Some Like It Hot 1959. One of Curtis's most cherished performances was in the comedy Some Like It Hot, in which he co-starred with Jack Lemmon and Marilyn Monroe. Curtis co-starred with Kirk Douglas as the slave-turned-rebel Antoninus in Spartacus. With a cast that included Laurence Olivier and Peter Ustinov, Curtis was able to hold his own in what is widely regarded as one of the finest historical epics of all time. The moment between Antoninus and Crassus, played by Laurence Olivier, became famous for its homoerotic overtones and was one of the most discussed parts of Spartacus. Curtis and Olivier battled to get the sequence included in the film, despite censorship concerns because they thought it gave the characters more depth and tackled essential issues of control and power. The sequence was originally removed from the film, but was subsequently restored with Anthony Hopkins portraying Olivier's voice. Both Tony Curtis's personal life and his professional career were profoundly affected by his first marriage to actress Janet Leigh. They were one of the most glitzy couples in Hollywood, thanks to parts in films like Little Women 1949. Fans excitedly followed every part of their life as they were drawn into their marriage, which was more than simply a personal bond. Both of their daughters, Kelly and Jamie Lee Curtis, went on to have successful acting careers. However, problems started to arise in their marriage, and in 1962 they decided to split. The love life of Curtis got more and more chaotic after their divorce. His relationship with Christine Kaufman, who co-starred with him in the 1963 picture Taras Bulba, was extensively reported in the media. Their union was not without its difficulties, but it did provide two daughters. With the spotlight on their relationship, Curtis felt even more pressure when his career hit hit a tough patch. The second marriage that Curtis had ended in a divorce in 1968. Leslie Allen became Curtis's third wife in 1968. Nicholas and Benjamin were born into a troubled marriage. Their relationship was straining due to Curtis's addiction and lifestyle rumors, which ultimately led to their 1982 divorce. This was the beginning of Curtis's trend of hastily wed weddings in his private life. His 1984 marriage to Andrea Savio ended in a divorce filing in 1992. He wed Lisa Deutsch, an attorney from outside the entertainment business, in 1993, although they were only married for just a year. The public saw Curtis as someone whose personal life was in continual upheaval, and he had become fairly notorious for his revolving door of marriages by this time. Jill Vandenberg, Curtis's sixth and last wife, provided him with the constant companionship he had been seeking in his other marriages. The 45-year age difference between them made their 1998 marriage all the more remarkable. Their love for animal rescue brought them together, and they eventually established an animal refuge. Dismissing worries about their age gap and lauding their bond, Curtis often acknowledged his satisfaction with Vandenberg. The pressure to keep up his Hollywood image as a leading man increased as Curtis's career blossomed in the 50s and 60s. Curtis, like many other celebrities of the time, became engrossed in the carefree culture of heavy drinking, drug use, and wild partying. He eventually became emotionally and physically drained from living this way of life. The breakdown in his personal life only served to worsen Curtis's already present alcohol and prescription medication addiction. As his drug misuse intensified, it started to impact his relationships and career, which was already a well-known fact in Hollywood. The 1970s were a time of great emotional and professional difficulty for Curtis. Arrested for possessing marijuana at Heathrow Airport in 1970, his struggle with addiction became known to the public. His professional and personal life both hit rock bottom after this occurrence. Far from the stardom he had experienced, Curtis began to take part in low-budget films and TV shows. In addition to significantly straining his already troubled relationships with family and loved ones, his substance abuse made it impossible for him to reclaim the career momentum he had previously had. His second marriage to Christine Kaufman was a difficult time in Curtis's personal life. Curtis was 38 years old and Kaufman was 17 years old. The public and media took notice of the large age difference between them. Their relationship was first seen as a whirlwind affair, but they married in 1963 despite the attention. But problems arose for their nuptials shortly after. While married to Kaufman, Curtis's drug misuse problems became more noticeable, and he went through a time of professional transformation. Relationship health was an issue for Curtis because to the demands of celebrity and his battles with addiction. Their marriage started to fail in the late 1960s, even though they had two daughters, Alexandra and Allegra. After a very public and troubled marriage, they finally parted ways in 1968 with a divorce. They had a contentious custody fight for their two girls after the divorce. Curtis, unable to bear the thought of being separated from his children, resorted to extreme methods, while Kaufman, who had gone back to her native Germany, demanded custody of the children. The girls were returned to the United States by Curtis without Kaufman's permission. Concerns were raised about Curtis's erratic lifestyle, even though he was first permitted to care for them. His third wife, Leslie Allen's frequent drinking and reports of his continuous drug misuse made the custody issue much more problematic. Curtis eventually consented to return their girls to Germany when Kaufman regained custody of them. The devastating effects of Curtis's drug misuse on his life became apparent to him by the 1980s. He decided to get assistance and enrolled in the famous Betty Ford Clinic, which treats addicts from the entertainment industry. While in treatment, Curtis made sincere attempts to beat his addiction and get back on track in his personal and professional life, which was a watershed moment in his life. Although his issues with drug misuse persisted, he was able to begin the road to recovery during his stay at the clinic. Some Like It Hot and Spartacus were two of Curtis's many successful singles from the early 1960s. Still, he kept taking on parts in lighter comedies and action flicks, which made it difficult for him to sustain his career. Fans weren't as moved by several of these flicks as they had been by his previous efforts. Light romantic comedies were losing popularity during this period of transition in Hollywood, which was not completely Curtis's fault, but was brought about by new directors' emergence and a trend towards more serious, socially concerned films. As a daring step to show that he had more than only an attractive face, Curtis played an infamous serial murderer in the 1968 film The Boston Strangler. This demonstrated a new aspect of his acting chops and signaled a turning point in his career. Critical praise and a new level of respect from his peers were bestowed upon him for his dramatic, terrifying, and profoundly moving performance performance. The arrival of the 1970s brought Curtis face to face with a new reality. He had mostly left his days as a starring actor in major Hollywood pictures. He moved to television, where he discovered fresh options to remain involved in the entertainment world. The 1978 of 1981 ABC series Vegas was one of his most famous television roles. For 17 episodes, Curtis portrayed casino owner Philip "Slick" Roth. Curtis kept appearing in supporting parts in films and TV shows all through the 70s and 80s. Not as successful as his previous work were his appearances in 1978's The Manitou and 1978's The Bad News Bears Go to Japan, a romantic story about a Palestinian lady and an Israeli man who fall in love despite the continuous violence between their people. David and Fatima starred Curtis in 2008. A lengthy and eventful career came to a close with this picture. After a successful acting career, Tony Curtis decided to pursue painting in his latter years. Despite occasional dabbling during his career, he didn't commit himself entirely to his newfound interest for painting until his twilight years. Curtis started devoting a lot more time to his paintings as his interest in them became increasingly serious. He became famous for his paintings and had a lot of success in his career. Numerous shows included Curtis's work, but a solo exhibition at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art stands out as a crowning accomplishment. He discovered fresh meaning and expression in his artwork, which gave him a new lease on life. Even though Curtis was a successful singer, he never really abandoned his acting profession. Even when painting became his life's profession, he nevertheless made cameo appearances and worked on projects connected to his earlier work from time to time. Even while Curtis was thriving creatively, his health started to deteriorate. Multiple health issues he was dealing with gradually became worse. In his latter years, Curtis battled many illnesses, and his health deteriorated quickly. Tony Curtis went away at his Las Vegas residence on September 29th, 2010. He was 85 years old when he passed away after a heart attack. His passing capped off an impressive career and life that had its share of triumphs and tragedies. The news of Curtis's death prompted many to consider his legacy in the arts and cinema. Concerns about his health and his latter years did not diminish the enduring acclaim for his acting and painting. Celebrating his roles in great films, influence on Hollywood, and artistic accomplishments, Curtis left behind a complicated and varied legacy. It was discovered that Tony Curtis had made an unexpected decision in his last will when he died away at the age of 85. After being married to Jill Vandenberg for the previous 12 years, Curtis made the decision to give her his whole inheritance. The fact that Nicholas, who had died away in 1994, and Curtis's 5 children, Jamie Lee, Kelly, Allegra, and Alexandra, were completely disregarded in the will just added insult to injury. Because of this, his children would not get a dime of his wealth, which included both monetary assets and priceless artifacts from his performing days. His children were among the many who were bewildered and upset by Curtis's choice. A tangled web of animosity ran through Curtis's connection with his offspring, particularly Allegra and Jamie Lee. Relationships weren't always smooth sailing, but Curtis never publicly stated his intention to totally disinherit his family. People started talking about why Jill Vandenberg, who was much younger, was chosen to inherit everything. Among Tony Curtis's children, Allegra expressed her dissatisfaction with the situation more vocally than anybody else. She was so angry about how her father's estate was handled that she publicly criticized Jill Vandenberg. An important source of friction was Jill's choice to sell off a lot of Curtis's stuff, including things that meant a lot to the family. The loss of their father's personal letters, photos, and cinematic memorabilia seemed like a betrayal to Allegra, who believed they should have kept them in the family. Allegra's outspoken remarks revealed the extent to which her pain at being disinherited and deprived of mementos from her father was magnified. The choice to sell Curtis's possessions at auction further inflamed tensions between Jill and Curtis's children, especially Allegra, who saw it as an act of contempt. The strained connections within the Curtis family were brought to light by this public quarrel, which became tabloid fodder. The disagreement escalated from a potentially private family issue into a well-publicized one, with each party making accusations and defending their conduct. Allegra and Kelly Curtis sought legal recourse after the discovery of their father's will. Because of the significant age gap between them and Curtis, as well as his deteriorating health in his latter years, the children asserted that their father's choice to leave everything to Jill Vandenberg was due to undue influence. Essentially, they argued that Jill had manipulated or pressured Curtis into excluding his children from the will. Elijah and Kelly faced an uphill fight in the courtroom. Jill may have taken advantage of Curtis, according to the claims of undue influence, but establishing this in court will be very very difficult. The will remained unchallenged despite their best attempts. Jill Vandenberg was declared the only beneficiary of Curtis's fortune after the court upheld his last intentions. The family's ties were already damaged even if the court case failed. Because of the public criticism Allegra leveled during the dispute over Tony Curtis's inheritance, it became abundantly evident that the family would never be able to get over their animosity against Jill and her son. Unlike her sisters Allegra and Kelly, Hollywood star Jamie Lee Curtis never publicly criticized her father or challenged his will in court. It was evident that Jamie Lee's views over being left out of her father's will were distinct from her siblings, which may have been perplexing given that she chose not to join them in the legal struggle. Perhaps her own success is to blame for her lack of enthusiasm. The legendary parts Jamie Lee Curtis had played in films like True Lies and Halloween had already catapulted her to stardom by the time her father passed away. She seemed to have no need for the fortune that her siblings were vying for, since she was well off and financially independent. It seems that Jamie Lee wasn't as worried about the will as her siblings were, since she showed no signs of anger or animosity in interviews conducted after her father passed away. This detachment from the scandal also indicated that Jamie Lee had resolved her feelings towards her father before to his passing. Her father was absent for a large portion of her upbringing, and she had openly discussed her difficulties in developing an emotional bond with him. Although they were seen together on occasion, their connection seemed distant, particularly in his latter years. It was clear that Jamie Lee and her father had become emotionally distant over the years, as she chose not to get involved in the legal dispute over the will. The troubled connection between Curtis and several of his children, especially Jamie Lee, was probably influenced by his turbulent personal life, which included many marriages and battles with addiction. Unlike Allegra and Kelly, Tony Curtis's daughter, Jamie Lee, was not deeply engaged in his latter life and had no complaints about the estate. Many had thought that Tony Curtis's emotional connection to some of his children had diminished over time, and his disengagement from the conflict proved it. Unlike her siblings, Jamie Lee Curtis didn't appear to mind that her father had a complex past and that his choices, including the one to leave her out of his will, didn't affect her to the same degree. She seems to have accepted her father's legacy before he passed away, judging by her public silence. Focusing on her own job and family, Jamie Lee avoided thinking about the inheritance or the court struggle. Her reaction demonstrated how emotionally distant she had become from her father, and how their connection had never been as tight as others would have thought given their shared celebrity. Like his work, Tony Curtis's life was full of twists and turns. The secrets his daughters have revealed about their father's life and family relationships have long baffled observers. A unique blend of success and scandal, Curtis's narrative includes his ascent to prominence, tumultuous romances, and the dramatic family fights surrounding his inheritance. Please subscribe and like this post if you found this in-depth look into Tony Curtis's life interesting. After all the changes Curtis's life has taken, what are your thoughts on it? Feel free to share your opinions down below.